about 78 million strong, the same as the baby boomers. What we had in between was the Gen X generation, which was roughly half of that. So you just didn't have the population to draw from. They're all investing in the future, in the kids.
And if I may, Penny Parker, to take you back to the Copper Mountain expansion, this additional snowmaking means a need for water.
Yes, it does. And then they do have, with Forest Service permits, et cetera, the water is in place that they will have for it, at least is for what they have been saying.
Business reporter Penny Parker of the Denver Post. Next, the mousetrap. It's that intersection of Interstate 70 and 25. It's been affectionately known as the well, maybe affectionate isn't the right word. It's been known as the mousetrap since the late 60s, and it still isn't a smooth path. Joe Garner?
Nor will it be a smooth path for the few years ahead at least. An 11-year phase of construction focusing on the general mousetrap area itself is coming to a close at the end of this year. So as it winds down, the next phase of construction is approaching. That's a segment from Washington Street to Brighton Boulevard. It's an elevated section of I-70 and is $80 million worth of construction to keep the traffic that now presumably is flowing through the mousetrap smoothly flowing on east of the mousetrap.
Dan Hopkins, who now works for the State Department of Transportation, says, look at this as a work in progress, a project that will never end.
That's correct. The reason is that the interstate highway system in general is reaching the end of its design lifespan. The 40th anniversary of the interstate highway system was last year. Most of the construction is now about 30 years old. So the roads that were built then are handling many thousands more vehicles than they were ever envisioned to handle.
Currently 340,000 a day, which was a projection for 15 years from now.
Something like that, yes. And truly the mousetrap was never intended to be an interchange of two major interstate highways. Interstate 70 was to end east of Denver. The mousetrap was originally an interchange between the Valley Highway and 46th Avenue. When political pressure was applied, Interstate 70 was extended through Denver into the mountains and on into Utah. And so there was an interchange there. It was pressed into service. It became our friend the mousetrap and has served us all these years since.
Joe Garner, another topic. Your other part of your beat is the Regional Transportation District. Now they have a full complement of board members, and the latest appointee favors light rail. Will there be any resolution to the ongoing disputes?
A person would think so. Mayor Webb this week appointed Bob Orr to fill the seat that was vacated in February by the death of Russ Tarvin. Mayor Webb is an advocate of light rail. I think we can be sure that Mr. Orr will vote in favor of light rail on most issues. That should give us a board that can come to decisions and consensus more easily. The board has been terrifically split for the past 3 months. My favorite anecdote is that since January, the RTD board has been unable to elect a secretary after some 10 votes. It's it's a show of temper, a temper tantrum by these adults, not to come together and choose a secretary.
Let me ask you one question about RTD and the 16th Street Mall, and also to Penny Parker.
Yeah.
And that is the buses, the free ride of these little, well, actually they're large buses. They need to be replaced anytime soon?
They also, like the interstates, are near the end of their lifespan, and they need to be replaced with larger buses to hold more people up and down the mall. There is a contract for 2 prototypes to be delivered by the end of June, but like almost everything with RTD, there are snags approaching. 4 members of the board are now calling for a review of the contract on grounds that the buses, which are now in the stage of frames, cannot be completed by the deadline, and on we go with another RTD saga.
Joe Garner of the Rocky Mountain News. Briefly to Penny Parker about the 16th Street Mall. One day it may be something more than little variety shops.
Let's hope so. Actually, the buses can't happen soon enough because we've got the Pavilions project, the biggest retail entertainment complex to open on the mall, coming online this fall. And, if the developer is right with his predictions, it's going to bring hordes of people, tourists and supposedly locals, down to the mall and looking for rides on those RTT buses that Joe's talking about.
And they need to purchase more than trinkets while they're there.
They do. They need to shop at Nike Town and eat at the Hard Rock Cafe and shop at Virgin Records and visit Wolfgang Puck restaurants and what have you.
Business reporter Penny Parker. Dave Krieger is here. Dave Krieger, you know these fellows. Let me introduce Penny Parker.
Hi, Penny.
Hi, Dave.
Dan Issel, for the 3rd time, if you don't call a 4th time being assistant to the president, or the 5th time because he's doing color, is now in charge of the Denver Nuggets. What happens next?
I don't know. Listening to Joe, it seems to me maybe the RTD board should be in charge of the Denver Nuggets. I think that might work pretty well. From where they are now, this may be the worst professional franchise in the history of pro sports. So they could have probably appointed you general manager, and a year from now they would have looked pretty good. I mean, they have nowhere to go but up at this point.
Well, with such a compliment in hand, how about to get through this season? They need 2 more wins. That Dan Issel plays center and Dave Krieger point guard.
Well, as I say, I don't think we could do much worse. I mean, I think we could take probably the team from your health club and go out from November to April and win 8 games, which is what they've done. I mean, it's almost a default kind of a thing where you can win 8 games. So I think anything, unfortunately Dan won't be here for those 10 games. He's going out scouting, but certainly if he stepped onto the court, or any of the rest of the retired players who now do TV and analysis for him, they'd probably be as good.
Dan Issel, as a player, played for the Nuggets 10 of his, nearly 16 years.
Yeah.
And he was coach for 2.5 years, and he walked away from the coach's job disappointed and frustrated?
Yeah, well, there's now a lot of different versions of that. If you go back to your George Orwell, you can see the genesis of this new history, where Dan, at one point, resigned. I remember that pretty well. I was there. 1995, he resigned. But if you read the accounts of the people who are friends of his in the media, and there are many, and you listen to the accounts of the people who are friends of his on the radio, and there are many, he did not resign.
Oh, he walked out,
He was
didn't he?
forced out. No, he was forced out.
Oh.
That is the current.
That's the Orwellian.
That is where we are today, yes. And I suspect that within a year or 2 he will have been fired. But I don't think we've gotten to that
But from
point
which
yet.
position at that time?
Well, yeah, maybe twice by then. I don't know.
The Nugget organization needs new people. And I guess the first question is, Issel and Bill Henslick, the current coach, were players together. It's going to be an emotional business decision.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult, it's obviously always difficult among these people because they're all friends. Virtually everybody in these positions in the NBA and really all professional sports are former players, and most of them from the same generation, and therefore a lot of them have played together. Bill Henslick will end up with the worst record that any coach has ever compiled in a season. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether that's his fault. He also has probably the worst team that anybody's ever coached in a season. So the apportioning of responsibility is a difficult matter, but nevertheless, if you go 8-63 as we're sitting here and likely to be, at the best, maybe they'll be 10-72, that's a very difficult thing to come back from.
The Nuggets fans have stopped attending the games.
Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about.
All 6 of them.
Yeah, I don't know any Nuggets fans at this point. I don't know any people who admit to being Nuggets fans. There are people who still own Nuggets paraphernalia and therefore appear to be Nuggets fans when you're walking up and down the street. But the crowds are basically friends and family at this point.
Ascent Entertainment, the owners of the Nuggets, must have deep pockets to keep this up when you don't have anybody at the cash register.
No, really the saddest thing is, as has been reported this year, the results on the basketball court have almost nothing to do with the profitability anymore of the team. And that helps to explain why corporate owners may not be as interested in winning and may not care as much. I mean, this team got this way because it really didn't try to win this year, didn't try to win last year. And in the old days, when you had an individual owner whose ego was involved in his team, that would have been unheard of, to actually not try to win. But this team, sponsorships are up, revenue from their programs are up. The corporate sponsors involved with the team aren't really looking at results. They're looking at other advantages to them of being involved with a pro sports franchise, and winning is really incidental.
Penny Parker.
Well, I was going to ask, whose fault is this, do you think? Is it just they're absolutely crummy players, or is it Charlie Lyons as a neglectful owner? Or where do we point fingers as far as, especially for people that want to be fans, I guess?
The convenient thing is you can pretty well point fingers at everybody when a situation is this bad. The owner certainly has to take his share of the blame. It's been a pretty bad franchise now throughout the 90s, and this company has been the owner. The players aren't any good, and so that's an accurate thing to do too. But I think primarily the former general manager, who Dan Issel replaced, Alan Bristow, came in with this bizarre plan to make the team worse. This was his plan. And he succeeded so brilliantly that you really have to wonder, if his plan had been to make it better, what would have happened? You know, he might have been one of the greats of all time. But his plan was to make the team worse, and he accomplished that goal.
Joe Garner.
Well, if profitability is up, how long do we wait for a turnaround, or is a turnaround not what we should be expecting here? What are the marching orders?
Well, I think I think profitability could be marginally up even further if they could fill the building. So certainly winning is not objectionable to them. I just don't think it's particularly important to them. Now, it has gotten to the point where the humiliation of this is so extensive that I think all of these corporate muckety-mucks who are involved are now sort of to the point where, gee, they'd like to win some games so they don't look like complete morons on television. But nevertheless, they're making a lot of money personally. Their stockholders are happy because the company is doing fine. And so there isn't really any professional incentive for them to be successful.
For the players, depressing must be much too gentle.
Yeah, it's been a nightmare for the players. There's no question about that. And this is something that's going to stay with them for the rest of their lives, which is the sad part about it. We just finished, every newspaper sports writer in town, I think, has just finished calling all the members of the previous worst team in the history of basketball, which is now 25 years ago. And these people still get calls every year. Whenever any team goes on a long losing streak, these people are all in their 50s now, 60s, some of them. They're still getting called. What happened back then in 1970? Why could you be so bad? And that's what faces LaFonso Ellis and Bryant Stith and Bobby Jackson and all the members of this team 25 years from now.
Dave Krieger of the Rocky Mountain News. That's our broadcast for this week. For my colleagues, I'm Don Kenny. Have a good weekend.
Funding for the state of Colorado is provided by the Adolph Coors Foundation, the Monfort Family Foundation, and Public Service Company, providing Coloradans with environmentally sound energy choices through WindSource and the Renewable Energy Trust. The State of Colorado, now in its 20th year, is produced in cooperation with Rocky Mountain Reflections. The State of Colorado provides background on issues of this week, Friday at 7:30 and Sunday